Welcome to the Rideshare Guy Podcast, where you will learn about the rideshare and mobility industry straight from Harry Campbell, who's got over 5 years experience covering the industry and has talked to thousands of drivers. There's no better place to stay up to date, entertained, and educated. So let's dive in.
All right, today I'm excited to be joined by the CEOs of three of the top rideshare for kids companies. We've got Joanna McFarland, the CEO of Hop Skip Drive, who's the largest operator in this space. We've also got Noreen Butler from Rubi Rydz. They're currently operating in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. And also, last but not least, Margarita Clarke from Jump Rides. It's operating in the Long Island and New York City area. So today we're going to have a panel discussion on a number of topics in the rideshare for kids space, ranging from what's changed over the years in the youth transportation industry, why the mission of these companies is so important to these founders and CEOs, how Uber and Lyft fit into this space, what it's like to actually drive for these services, specifically how much money you can make, since that's what we all care about, right? The types of rides you'll get, and also how much more rewarding transporting kids can be than inebriated adults, right? We all know that that has its downside. So we'll also talk a bit about business strategy, like, for example, how Hop Skip Drive has really pivoted and started focusing more on the B2B market, working with schools and districts across the country, how COVID has affected these businesses, and also what they can look forward to in the future, what we can look forward to in the future from these three amazing companies. So if you're interested in learning more about any of these founders or these companies, or driving for one of these companies, take a look at the description or show notes for more information and links to their websites. You know, this rideshare for kids space has been around for a while, and I think it's a really important and interesting niche, and also a great business opportunity. You know, I think for any Uber and Lyft driver out there, they've probably done rides, for minors, people under the age of 18. I think some, if not most drivers may know now by this point that these rides are actually against Uber's terms of service, but we do know that they happen anyways, and it's sort of swept under the rug. But there's some big insurance, safety, issues, kind of bubbling under the surface. So I think these services are really important. And, one of the nice things for drivers is that because parents, care about their kids a lot, obviously, they're willing to pay more for these rides. So these rides can be a little bit more predictable. They do pay much better. And, it's sort of an interesting, kind of bit different experience. So I really think it's a cool opportunity for those that like kids, that are looking to maybe graduate to something that's a little bit, more of a high-paying, different type of job. And, like everything in the gig economy, this may not be perfect for you, but definitely wanted to highlight it today with these three great CEOs of three of the top rideshare for kids companies. So before we get into the panel, I'm going to quickly read off the bio for each one of our participants. So first up, we've got Joanna McFarland. She's the CEO, president, and co-founder of Hop Skip Drive, the innovator in safe student transportation. Hop Skip Drive's mission is to create opportunity for all through mobility. They're a ride service that helps families and schools get kids where they need to go safely and dependably, with a network of more than 7,000 highly vetted care drivers. They currently serve 16 markets in 9 states plus Washington, D.C., working with over 300 schools, districts, and county child welfare agencies, as well as thousands of families. And Joanna has an MBA from Stanford University and a BS from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. She lives in Los Angeles with her husband and her 2 boys. We've also got Noreen Butler. Noreen was a single mom in search of help to support the busy schedules of her children. With a mission to create a community of drivers for families in need, Rubi Rydz was established and has since maintained the highest standards to select its drivers. They understand that transportation is critical to advancing health equity and is dedicated to integrating technology, community, and new solutions to help kids and families by providing a safe, dependable mode of transportation. You can learn more at rubyrydz.com. And then Margarita Clarke, she is the founder and CEO of Jump Rides. She's a native New Yorker from the suburbs of Long Island. And after college, she actually attained a position as an assistant director at her church's after-school summer program. And, after working there for a few years, she created a really strong bond with the children and parents. And she found that, with most of the parents working in New York City, it was difficult for a lot of them to return to the program and pick up their children before closing time. So out of this community need, TD's Kitty Cab was born, which then had a name change to Jump Rides in 2019. So Margarita actually began servicing her own community with her private car, then started purchasing 15-passenger vans with hired drivers, and eventually moved to New York City to join the rideshare industry. So very excited to have Margarita on, and that's a quick intro for all of the participants. And if you're ready, let's get moving. All right. I'm really excited to be joined by three amazing ladies and three amazing CEOs. We've got Joanna McFarland from Hop Skip Drive, Noreen Butler from Rubi Rides, and Margarita Clarke from Jump Ride. So really appreciate each of you joining. And I'm excited to dig into the conversation today because, I think we're at an interesting time coming out of COVID. Obviously, kids are front and center for a lot of people. And I'm excited to really, sort of share the mission of the companies that you all have created and sort of what you're doing. I think drivers are obviously a huge component of this area for rideshare. And Joanna, I kind of wanted to start with you because you and I have actually been at this for a while. I think we both started around 2014. Not many people make it, this far in rideshare years. It's sort of like dog years, right? If you've made it this long, you're doing something right. So I'd love to know kind of how things have changed for you over at Hop Skip Drive over the years, and what you're focused on these days, and kind of how that compares to 7 years ago when you first started the company.
Sure. And Harry, it's great to see you again, and great to meet Noreen and Margarita. We have been doing this for a while. So we started about 7 years ago, really primarily as a consumer business. So, the idea of solving the problem that families have all over the country, really getting kids to and from school and after school activities. And doing that in a way that was very safe. And so thinking about safety differently, thinking about who the driver is very differently, and kind of creating a new opportunity in rideshare for drivers who really want a safe experience as well, and for drivers who might prefer to drive during the day and might prefer a passenger who is not an adult and not an inebriated adult.
Yeah.
And that was where the business started. From the very beginning, we set out our 15-point certification process for drivers, thinking about really who a care driver is and what it means to be a care driver on our platform. Our platform has evolved. We still serve consumers, but mostly we serve school districts and county governments, really helping solve the student transportation crisis that has now reached crisis point. I think we saw those trends even before COVID, and I think those trends have really just been accelerated by COVID. And we're hearing, stories all over the country about bus driver shortages.
Yeah,
I think what we bring to that market is an entirely new type of supply. And what that does is that opens up opportunities for care drivers to make money in a way that they never could before. They can't, an individual can't go out and contract with a school district,
right.
But we enable that to happen. And again, it's providing opportunities for safe transportation at a premium price during the day, and really giving back to your community. And so it's really more than just doing a ride.
Yeah, no, I think that's really a great background. And, since we're both based here in Los Angeles, it's been cool for me personally to see the journey of Hop Skip Drive and all the growth that you guys have had over the years, and even the change in sort of business focus, as you mentioned. I think that's interesting because obviously from the outside, it's not always as apparent, but I think the opportunities on the driver's side are really interesting. And Margarita, I wanted to pivot to you because I know that your company is kind of just getting started right now. And why do you think that youth transportation is so important right now? Like, obviously you're Joanna has been at this for a while. You sort of just found this need and are starting this company. So I'm assuming that you kind of feel that, this is something that must be solved now. So why do you think it is so important right now at this moment in time?
Well, it actually stems from my own community. Mm-hmm. So not sure if So in our backstory, I started with my own car and then, vans and, hiring personal drivers. And it started with parents that I knew from working within aftercare program and so forth for many, many years, seeing these kids grow and their parents saying, I work in the city. I'm not going to make it. The aftercare is going to close. So it was just as Joanna was saying, meeting a need for the families, and just building that relationship there. So the youth, I would say that they're most important in terms of transportation because you have parents that are at work and you have their kids that just the same have their own schedule. And everything has to work simultaneously. The kids have to get to school, aftercare, other programs so that they can grow and then be independent. So, making sure that the youth are transported safely and, and meeting all their needs is really imperative.
Yeah, very cool. And I mean, I know that when I first started my blog 7 years ago, I didn't have any kids, and now I've got a couple kids. So I feel like these services, resonate even more with me, especially since I've seen both sides of the coin. I've been and am an active Uber and Lyft driver, and obviously need transportation for my kids too. So understanding some of the balance there, and I think one of the cool things that I've seen with the companies that you all are representing today is every startup, every technology company, the founder often has a cool story or a cool narrative that sometimes is a bit of hyperbole. But I feel like with a lot of these services, that we're talking about today, the founding story is really personal. So I would love to know, Noreen, from you, kind of to talk a little bit about why you started Ruby Rides and kind of how you got into this. And if others want to share too, we can definitely hear from you two also.
Sure. Thank you, Harry and Joanna and Margarita. It's a pleasure meeting you guys virtually. Truly, Harry, you said it. My story came from a personal need as a single mom of two kids. My nanny decided she wanted to go back to school, and logistically, I was in a true panic. And really, after taking an inventory of my personal life, I recognized that the ages that my kids were at the time, 11 and 13, I didn't necessarily need a full-time nanny. I really needed a driver. And I didn't have the luxury. My family is now West Coast, of relying on family to help me with carpools, et cetera. So I was really in a panic. With that said, I was committed to figuring this out. So I parked my car for a few months and I literally just Uber and Lyfted around town. And I really wanted to learn more about the driver profile, but I knew that safety was at the forefront of everything in my mind. And at Ruby Rides, safety is the forefront at, everything we do. We lead with safety first. So with that said, I really was fascinated about learning about driver profiles. I mean, there are a lot of drivers were educated individuals that were truly just doing a side hustle to make other, revenue streams and having that as a part of their life. And so with that said, I also would share with the drivers what I was looking for. I knew I needed a year commitment. I knew I needed my kids picked up at the same time every day. I live a mile from my kids' school. My ex-husband lives 5. So I knew that, this was something that was going to not be for everybody. And when I would share with drivers what I was looking for, some of them would respond and say, that just isn't for me. I mean, I love being able to just drive when I want to drive, not every single day at 3:00. And as a mom, we also can resonate with these carpool lines. I mean, they're insane. So that was another thing. I was like, oh my gosh, and this driver, that's going to be crazy that he's going to now have to sit through a carpool line. Well, the other thing I recognize too is, it takes a village. I mean, this is not an undertaking that just one person can do alone. And so I knew I also wanted to, assemble a team of trusted drivers. So with that said, I would, reach out to these drivers in the car and let them know exactly what I was looking for and would ask them, if you know of anyone or you might be interested, please let me know. Here's my contact information. If I intuitively knew that I felt safe with this driver, their car was clean, they had professionalism, communication skills, all of these variables that I knew would make my kids feel comfortable. So we then invited a few drivers into my home and I interviewed them with my kids. And then we thoroughly vetted them. I did, So I then put together a little portfolio for my kids' principal. And I said, listen, I've had to hire a team of trusted drivers. I've thoroughly vetted them, and they're going to help me with transportation. Well, at the time, my kid's youth minister at their school was arrested for sexual molestation. So the school was on extremely heightened alert. So the principal said to me, Noreen, please, I totally understand. I appreciate your thoroughness and the vetting that you've done. Please just keep this quiet. Well, when my kids wanted to have friends over, I would have to disclose to other families, well, are you okay with Pedro or Jean-Louis or Antoinette picking up the kids? And they would say, what? Who are those people? And I would say they're drivers that I've vetted and I trust them, and they help me with transportation for the kids. My phone started ringing off the hook. Everyone wanted to borrow these drivers. So I recognize just through my own personal experience that there is a true need. And so at Ruby Rides, it's interesting to hear our different niches and what we are doing and how our companies have evolved. We really specialize in the safe, trusted transportation of minors from point A to B. And that's what we do.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that backstory. And I think one theme that seems to be resonating, that I think is interesting too, especially on the driver's side, is, I'm hearing in-person interviews, lots of vetting, lots of safety. And, I think that one of the things that a lot of folks are attracted to the gig economy and driving for Uber and Lyft is because it's actually so easy to get signed up and get started, right? I mean, kind of in a best case scenario, you can be approved and driving in less than 24 hours if everything goes according to plan. And obviously, it sounds like with these services, that's not the case, and kind of for a good reason, because you want, the best of the best. So, I mean, Joanna, I'd love to know, since, you've obviously been doing this for a while, like, how do you see your services? Like, how do you see them, not necessarily in competition, but with Uber and Lyft, but obviously they're providing, a very similar service. And how do you see them? Like, how do you stack yourself up against Uber and Lyft, for example?
Yeah, I mean, we see ourselves as very different than Uber and Lyft. We're serving a very different audience. And so we don't really compare ourselves to Uber or Lyft at all. The way that I think about it, and I think Noreen touched on this, like, we designed everything about our service, not just the drivers, but all of the technology, our safe ride technology, our safe ride support team, our authentication procedures. All of that was designed for minors and people who need a little extra care. And all of that was designed for when the rider is not the one who booked the ride and is not, may not have a phone and may not be able to say, like, hey, I think you're going the wrong way, or hey, I don't really like what's going on right now, right? Like, you or I can end a ride, get out, order another ride, right? Or, if your Uber cancels on you, that's mildly irritating, right? Like, you cannot leave a child stranded somewhere. That's a safety issue. So we designed all of it from the beginning with all of that in mind. So it is very, very different. All of our rides are prearranged. It's not on demand, right? It's booked at least 8 hours in advance. And as I think Margarita mentioned, it is the same ride every single, for a lot of kids, when school starts, when school ends, when soccer starts. And so we have parents and school districts now, most of our business is coming from school districts. They are booking 180 rides, 2 days, 180 days, 2 rides a day for an entire school year. So that's a very different thing. So what drivers really like is they can come into our app, they can see rides way in advance, and they can set their schedule. They can say, this is exactly where I want to drive. This is when I want to drive. I know exactly how much money I'm going to make. We find, sometimes they're like, I really like that kid, and that really fits my schedule well. And so I want to take that kid for the next month. Right. And then they develop relationships, and we find, they get really excited to find out how did Susie do on her test? She was, trying out for cheer. Did she make it? And they get very invested. And I think it is more of a process to go through. But again, given that all of our drivers have at least 5 years of caregiving experience, this is somewhat similar to what it takes to go through and get a babysitting job or a nanny job or work at a daycare or work at a school. And most of our drivers have that experience. And I think what is really attractive, so yes, it's going to take a little bit longer to get through that process. But, most of our drivers are women. They are looking for flexibility. They are looking for safety, and they're looking for the opportunity to earn. And especially now, as we have seen millions of women leave the workforce during the pandemic, this is a great way to get back into the workforce. And this is a way to get back into the workforce with that flexibility that is so important, because so many women are caregivers. So you can't drive Monday at 3:00. that's fine. But if you
Yeah.
can drive on Tuesday at 3:00, like maybe you pick up a ride here and there. Maybe you do it in and around when you're taking your mother to the doctor or, taking care of your grandkids. And so it provides a real opportunity. It does have a little bit more of an upfront funnel to get through and process to get through. But I think drivers that drive on these platforms are really actually much more attracted to the safety and the flexibility in addition to the earnings.
Yeah. It's sort of interesting that, sometimes I think a lot of people, in general, right, if they're working, they're usually working because they need the money. I think not many people do any job for free, right? So money is important, and how much you're getting paid is usually the primary thing. But I think what we have heard feedback that's really interesting from folks that are driving for Hop, Skip, Drive or, other services is that a lot of the kind of like ancillary benefits, like you talked about the relationships with the kids, like I think someone joked earlier that, no inebriated passengers, right? When you're transporting kids, hopefully at least. But that's actually one thing, that I think does get very tiring. And it's something that I hear over and over from female rideshare drivers is that they really, it's like, for me, it's like, okay, I'm dealing with a bunch of drunk guys, but, for many female Uber and Lyft drivers, it's like, not only do I have to deal with them, but they're hitting on me or they're making inappropriate comments. And I think during the pandemic, we've seen, a lot of folks shift over to food delivery. And the joke is that, a burrito won't talk back to you. They don't, act poorly or misbehave, right? And even though you may not make as much money, I think we're seeing like people kind of try that. So I'd love to know, Margarita, from the drivers that you've been talking to and, thinking about hiring for your company, like, what do you think, what are some of those things you've heard from drivers? Okay, we know that money is important. The bond that you develop with some of these kids is pretty cool. Is there anything else that's sort of like a tangential benefit or, something that's unexpected, kind of like an unexpected benefit? What do you sell your drivers on, to come work for Jump Rides?
Pre-scheduled rides is number one.
Mm.
So the ability for most of these drivers to be able to set their schedule and just have continuity. It's a steadier income in rideshare, which is something that's almost a taboo when you talk about rideshare. Steady, what do you mean steady? No such thing. But in our realm, when we're talking about, serving this part of the family ecosystem, which is the youth, then that's available because you have to think it through. A mom may be like, oh, my son has karate tomorrow. It's 9:00 at night. Let me pre-schedule this ride right now.
Yeah.
The driver can accept it the night before and know what he's going to do. We have to think he has his own kids as well. So just that ability to preset their schedule, and most of them also still drive for Uber and Lyft. So they don't have to stop driving for other ride shares. They can supplement their income. So that's the big hitter.
Yeah, interesting. And, Noreen, I think, I touched on pay, and I usually talk about pay a lot in anything regarding drivers because it is important. And so I'm curious how you think about, obviously when you're compensating your drivers, do you think about, okay, how do you think about compensating them? I think is the high level question. Do you look at, okay, they can make about this much with Uber and Lyft in the city and I want to pay them more, or I want to offer them some other benefits, or, sort of like, are they looking for other jobs and you need to pay them? I'm just curious how you think about the pay for drivers and kind of how what you want your drivers to make, for example, in your city.
Sure. I think thematically what we've heard is reoccurring, right? So our drivers love that. I mean, we're bringing opportunity to them. They're not going to look for a ride or, we are presenting opportunities for our, we assemble teams of trusted drivers for our families, and these drivers become extensions of these families. I mean, at Christmas time or holidays, they're giving their drivers gifts. They're saying thank you. Parents are tipping these drivers very well because they're so grateful for having this peace of mind and resource. So with that said, the culture around the driver community and what we're providing them is critical to the success of our company. And I think that's thematic amongst us all, right? And I think that, it varies, right? Based on usage of the family's needs, the distance of the ride, the frequency. And so where we are, and like Margarita said as well, we at Ruby Rides do pull from the gig economy in many forms, right? Because we are just an additional revenue stream. What's great for our drivers is that it's predictable earnings. They know that if they're going to be driving for these families that we're providing them the opportunity for, they can pre-budget into their weekly, monthly, schedule and budget. Okay, with Rubi Rides, I'm going to average, $500, $1,000 more, depending upon how frequently they want to drive. So, we typically learn more so about our families' needs and how we can accommodate them, and then, provide the opportunities to drivers, but we are able to gauge what kind of earnings they're going to be making. And we have a flat fare structure. So we have a fixed price to go a certain amount of miles, and then it's an additional cost to go additional miles. And so, for families as well, they know exactly how much that ride is going to cost. It's not going to vary depending upon time of day or distance traveled. So, there are variables, mentioning that our loved ones are precious gems. They require a higher level of transportation support services and attention. And so, based on whether or not that child needs to be escorted in or, handed off to a coach, those are all variables that families are able to have our drivers do for them, but that comes at an additional cost. So depending upon what our drivers are doing for their families, that also is a variable as to how much money they're going to make. But, I think that it's the predictability and knowing your passengers.
Yeah, it does seem like there's this interesting, sort of theme that I think the three of you have mentioned, and especially in regards to driver earnings, is that, right now you may actually have more flexibility than you need if you're driving for Uber and Lyft, log on whenever and wherever. You actually want a little bit of predictability. You maybe don't want to have to work 9 to 5 every single day, but if you can, for a lot of people, if you can get, certain rides or work certain blocks consistently, it's a good, kind of recurring revenue opportunity. It's reliable, like you said, right? Like the kids need to ride every single day. So it's a good opportunity for these drivers. And Joanna, I know you and I have touched on this a few times over the years. I'm curious how, I believe all of your drivers are independent contractors. And it does seem like, though, that the job is more rewarding in a way, but it's also maybe more involved, right? There might be waiting time in carpool lanes. You might need to actually make sure that, the child gets into their house or to the soccer practice. I mean, I'm curious how that has played into your thinking, and if all your drivers are still independent contractors, or kind of how you think about that, right? Like, would it be a better situation to maybe hire employees, and kind of how you're dealing with that right now?
Yeah, all of our drivers are independent contractors, and I think you're hearing themes, from all of us, right? What drivers like is they like the predictability, they like the flexibility, being able to set their schedule, drive exactly when they want, where they want, the ability to know exactly what they're going to make ahead of time. And by the way, none of us have said it, I think it's really important. Like, safety is a feature and that parents and school districts are willing to pay more for, right? So, you're going to make far more on a ride, on a hop, skip, drive ride than you're going to make with Uber or Lyft, right? And so I think that's also something that is important to really think about. Like, these rides pay very, very well. And so, we see, especially with care drivers, and again, who they are and how this fits into their lives, flexibility is so important to them. They are not looking for a full-time job. They're looking for something that they can do when they want and where they want and for how long they want. And we really give them that flexibility. You're not trolling around waiting for a ping. You have set it ahead of time. You know your schedule, you know exactly what's going on, and you get the added benefit of having a little bit of meaning. I mean, some drivers have called this the best paid volunteer opportunity they've ever had, which I love. That was one of my favorite quotes from a driver. So for us, the independent contractor model is truly important. And again, as we have seen how important flexibility is, and how many women in particular have left the workforce because of that, I think it's very important that we continue to offer models of work opportunities that give that flexibility. And so we continue in that model. And I think, even more so than Uber and Lyft, it's a model that really does truly reflect our driver community and how they work on our platform. Even just looking at the average number of hours a week they're working on our platform, it's actually very little. And so that flexibility, I think is very, very important, and far more important than, turning that into a W-2 position where you're going to make less money and far fewer drivers are going to be on the platform.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way that you put it. And it does seem like sort of the type of folks that are attracted to these driving jobs, specifically working with kids, probably have kids of their own or probably have other things going on in their life, right? And so it sort of seems like the perfect fit, the perfect balance with, some of that predictability, but also still a lot of flexibility, kind of like the best of both worlds, which is why I think, I'm personally a big fan of the gig economy, if you didn't know, and the various jobs and opportunities. So Joanna, I really appreciate, all that you've shared kind of, specifically with Hop Skip Drive, and, you're a little bit on the later side. I want to turn it to Margarita, because Margarita, I think you're probably at the earliest stage of, building one of these companies. So I'd love to know kind of like, what are the challenges you're, maybe actually tell us a little bit, like what stage are you at with your company right now? And like, what are the challenges you're facing right now? And like, what's the number one thing keeping you up at night in regards to running your company?
Sure. So we're in a transition where we're coming from Long Island, which does not require a TLC license rather than an overshadowing TNC for the state. Mm-hmm. And so now we're operating in Queens and Brooklyn. So we're dealing with TLC drivers, totally different license. Yeah. And so there are no other kid rideshare companies in New York City, excluding one, but they're mainly just in Manhattan and nowhere else. So most of the drivers are unfamiliar. They're like, so I'm going to have a baby in my back seat. So you mean to tell me I have to put a seatbelt in a convertible seat? And yes, you do. So now they're open to it because, as we know, native New Yorkers love money. So when they see, just as Joanne presented, you're going to get paid way more than Uber or Lyft, they're like, oh yeah, let me go ahead and submit my documents. And then, the slowdown goes in the training, but that's not something that we're going to halt on. So it's just making sure that we get those proper, the right fitting drivers, because you can meet all the basic requirements. You can have all the documentation, the licensing and everything. But if you don't have the right attitude, I'm not going to let you move forward, or our HR team is not going to let you move forward and transport somebody else's child, especially if you are not, as we say, family focused, or someone that's really into catering to kids and to family. So that means you have to be okay with communicating with a parent or guardian that booked on their app and wants to, say, hey, there's a change or something. Even if they do it on their app, you know how parents are. They want to pick up the phone and call you, or they may want to send you a message and just hear it from you directly. And we get that. So the transition is just making sure that we have the proper drivers in the seat for the families.
Yeah. Well, so I guess you have an additional extra fun challenge dealing with the TLC laws and all of that in New York City. So that's like an extra layer of fun for you, Margarita. But one thing too, you mentioned parents, right? And dealing with parents. It sounds like we're all parents here on this panel. And, parents can be, what's the word? I guess since I'm a parent, I can say like obsessive about their kids, a little, emotional, right? Like over, react a little bit crazy, right? Everyone wants to protect their kids. So what's it like, dealing, Noreen? I mean, what's it like dealing with the parents? Like they're like, I think Joanna mentioned, right? Like they're the customer. If something goes wrong, I bet they have some things to say, right? Or if things don't go according to plan, I'm sure that you get, angry emails or phone calls or customer service. So what's it like dealing with your customers, your parents? And I'd love to know.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a full-time job in itself. I think one of the things I truly feel is that, I sleep very little, right? Because you're constantly thinking about just so many facets of what we do. With that said, at Ruby Rides, we try to lead with empathy and follow with service, right? Because there's such a service component to what we're doing. And I really think that at the end of the day, we're all just trying to do the best we can and provide our kids with the ability to be mobile and have a trusted person on the other end, so that as parents, we're always feeling guilt, like we should be doing more. And then when you think about taking the transportation element out of being a parent, there's a lot there. We always you have to have the infrastructure and client service team in place to be available for these calls, because kids are going to leave things in cars, backpacks, equipment. A driver with traffic, sometimes they might be running behind. Parents are, in meetings, they're doing multiple things as well. So we do have a system in place where someone is accessible all the time when rides are taking place. Because, as a parent, I want to be able to contact a live person. And so when our rides are happening, not only are they being tracked in real time by someone looking at our admin dashboard and screen, there also is a person available just to answer phone calls. And, the technology that we have in place allows for parents to contact a live person while the ride is taking place. And so, being mindful of the safety factor, we don't want our drivers to be distracted with having to worry about getting phone calls while in the car. So we have policies and procedures in place to help mitigate needing to speak with that driver unless it's an absolute emergency.
Interesting. So it's sort of like an extra layer of protection or security. So obviously parents can kind of feel safe and, I assume understand what's going on with them, and because they're not in the car. I guess that's kind of like the interesting, challenge of this business, right?
And I think, though, that the other thing we can also probably all resonate with is there's nothing more powerful than a referral from another mom saying, you know what? I trust Jump Rides. I trust Hop Skip Drive. I trust Ruby Rides. And that is so meaningful because organically, I just know from my own personal experience, we've grown just from referrals and word of mouth. Yeah. And so, the parent component to this, though, is a critical component, I think, to all of our angst and our success.
Yeah. So I'm curious, when you hear from Margarita or Joanna, I'm curious, when you hear from your customers, from your parents, like what is the reason why they're coming and using your services? What is the one thing that they love? Or they, they don't feel safe putting their kids in an Uber and Lyft. It's technically against the terms of service, but many people do it anyways. What's the one thing that like really resonates and says, this is why I love this service?
I think it's peace of mind. They trust the service. They understand all of the safety that goes into it, and it gives them peace of mind.
Got it. Anything to add?
I agree. Absolutely. Peace of mind. And the fact that they can move forward with their day. Like I always say, there's a family ecosystem that serves our economy. And part of that ecosystem is getting the kids to and from where they need to go while mom and dad or parental guardian support the household that they all live in. So,
cool. So I think the last topic I want to touch on before we wrap up here, we're all entrepreneurs on this panel. And so I want to dig into a little bit on the business side. And Joanna, I think it's been fun for me to see the transition over the years for Hop Skip Drive. I'd love to kind of know what are some of the reasons behind why you've made more of this shift from, consumers, B2C to more the B2B. And now you're working with these school districts that kind of happen naturally. And that's the bigger opportunity. I know you said you're doing a little bit of both now, but what's the shift been like? What are the reasons behind that? And what do you see kind of in the future for Hop Skip Drive? Should we expect more of that?
Yeah. I think you'll definitely see more of that. We really made, I think we start, we all had a very personal reason for starting this business. I mean, mine, for me, I was just feeling very guilty. I couldn't get my son to karate on Thursday at 3:00 as a full-time working mom. And every other mom I talked to had a version of the transportation struggle. And it became something that I just was so passionate about. I couldn't not solve. As we dug into what does it really mean to move kids around, we realized just how broken the school transportation system is. And that was before COVID. I mean, we really started doing this even before COVID, really helping, you think about the big yellow bus has been the model for, 50 plus years. But there's multiple reasons why that model isn't the only model that makes sense anymore. And there's a real need for smaller vehicles and for much more flexibility. We talk about flexibility for drivers, but really districts need flexibility as well. And, and we saw a greater mission, really expanding our mission of helping families to really creating opportunity for all through mobility and thinking about some of our more vulnerable youth and students who need need access to school. The difference, a ride can be the difference between struggle and success. And we help school districts with students with special needs, with students experiencing homelessness, with students in our foster care system who really need that stability of getting to school every day. And transportation is one of the biggest barriers there. So there was just a really big opportunity to solve that problem. And as we got in, we saw even more how the entire student transportation system is broken, and how we can apply the same software and technology and operations that we built for families, and the safety applies very much to school districts. And so, we're now in 300 plus districts across the country in 9 states, and growing. And you'll continue to see that. I mean, the number of inbounds that we have had just, since the beginning of school, mostly, I think due to the driver shortage, but just also due to districts realizing they need to really think differently about how to solve these problems that are systemic to the industry. So you'll see that more. But I think you'll also see consumer from us, because as we are how your kids are getting to and from school, it becomes it goes back to that peace of mind and that trust. If your school trusts us, you as a parent are much more likely to make that initial leap of faith and trust us as well.
Yeah, it seems like there are some good network effects too from, if kids are getting rides from Hop Skip Drive as part of their school, and then, the parents need a little bit help here and there, then that B2C side comes in. Have you run into any issues or challenges? Obviously, you mentioned buses, right? Hold a lot of kids. I'm assuming 50 plus kids, and a 4-door sedan only holds, 1 to 3 kids. So have there been any issues with, maybe it's almost like too small of a vehicle, and, maybe you need something in between, or you're experimenting or thinking about any kind of in between, vans or, bigger vehicles that aren't quite buses?
Yeah, well, so interestingly, school transportation is the largest mass transit system in the country, with almost 500,000 yellow buses. 27 million kids ride a bus to school.
Wow.
There's over 50 million school-age kids in this country. So right there, you can see less than half of our kids are taking a bus to school. So the truth is that most of our buses are heavily underutilized. And if you have a 60-passenger bus that has 10 kids in it, it is far more cost effective to use sedans or minivans or SUVs to get those kids to school, coupled with the fact that you don't have enough drivers anyway. And so that's where we see ourselves as being part of that solution to really help districts optimize. There's absolutely a place for that yellow school bus, but there's a huge place for sedans, for minivans, for vans, for all kinds of models and asset sizes, and really helping districts think differently about that to optimize across all vehicle types is a huge game changer.
Yeah, interesting. Noreen, I know you've also been operating through COVID. So what challenges have you seen from that, and what should we expect from Rubi in the future?
Sure. I think that as we're still all navigating this new sense of normal, right? I mean, a lot of parents I know in our market are kind of navigating what their work situation looks like, and just being able to have been at home for so long and being more participatory of the ride, necessities of their kids that have actually also been limited. Here in DC, we've really been impacted by COVID in the sense that the majority of our students and ridership, last year we're schooling remote. We really did deviate more into the senior space during COVID, and working with assisted living facilities and helping those seniors getting to and from medical appointments, along with the special needs community, and finding and building relationships there. And primarily also in the adult special needs community, there's a huge market there, and I think that what is really something that we all can resonate with, and like Joanna mentioned, one of the biggest barriers for so many is transportation, and it's a safe, trusted ride. And in that, space too of adults with special needs, they still are as precious. And like, we've said, our riders are relying on us. They're not independent in the sense that they can just get out of a vehicle, or, they can navigate through speaking for themselves. And I think that it comes back to the community of loved ones that we're all working towards helping provide transportation in a safe, trusted way for. And so with that said, we really are, looking at different facets in the community, I think, and building really strategic partnerships, and looking to take, our service nationally, to some, specific markets, obviously, with where we have intended growth. But I think that it's been fascinating to sit together and really learn about what we're all doing and how we're making an impact. And I think that we all know too, this is a market that's massive. And, I think that if we collaboratively too, all work together in ways, we can make a tremendous difference. And, I think what we do has such a purpose, and knowing that we're helping so many, whether it's drivers have opportunity for work that fits within their schedule, or, loved ones trying to figure out how to get their kids to and from, and, special needs, adults, seniors, whatever that commodity might be. But I think that it's a need that is truly not going to ever go away. And so, yeah.
Very, very cool. Yeah, no, I think appreciate that. And, I think for those in the DC area, we've got Rubi Rides, especially if you're interested on the driver or rider side. Margarita, I'll give you a quick last word. And it sounds like in the New York City now, I didn't realize the New York City too, but also Long Island area. Anything final words to add? It's good timing too, because I hear very appropriate. My son just stomped into the house and is making a lot of noise. So it's perfect timing.
Well, first off, it was a pleasure to be on the panel here with Noreen and Joanna. I'm just so glad that we as mothers, as women, and all as entrepreneurs, including you too, Harry, that we're able to identify a need that directly impacts our families as well as others, and use our entrepreneurial skills to assist, families, communities, and just pretty much make our world a better place as much as possible. So we have to think 10, 20 years before, everyone was jumping on the school bus or walking home, So now we have these additional options, especially when we're talking about safety with our kids. And I'm not talking about just in the car, but we're thinking about, did my kid make it home on time? Is my kid okay in school? Because, our world changes a lot. There's we don't like to talk about it, but there is violence, and we want to avoid our families, our kids from being involved in any kind of that. So our service is to better our families, to better our communities, to better our economy. And so it's just really a pleasure and an honor to be able to use my talents to contribute to this industry.
Cool. Well, really appreciate each and all three of you joining the podcast, the YouTube, and so for drivers who are in the DC area, I know Rubi Rides is operating, Jump Rides, New York area. Joanna, with Hop Skip Drive, I know you're in 16 markets, and I think 9 states plus Washington DC. It looks like, so lots of opportunities with Hop Skip Drive. We'll leave links in the show notes if anyone wants to learn more about each of the great founders and CEOs we had on this podcast and the companies and the driving opportunities. I bet we might get a few customers out of this one too. So really appreciate each one of you joining, and we'll look to chat more in the future. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, ladies. Thank you, Harry.
Bye.
Take care.